Hey guys, welcome back. My name's Cureton, senior journalist for XR Today. We're always bringing you the latest and greatest from the VR, AR, and XR industries. Today we're going to be speaking to Mr. Kyle Jackson. He is the chief executive of Talespin. It's a wonderful company doing some very good immersive learning solutions over there and over on the other side of the pond in the United States. So it's a pleasure having you here, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, brilliant. We're going to dive right into this. So, before we get started, I wanted to ask can you tell us a little bit about what Tailspin offers its clients and what kind of solutions it provides?
Yeah, absolutely. So we let's see. So we started with the mindset of how do we develop immersive learning ecosystem or at scale. And so in trying to figure out that Rubik's cube, we've settled on conversational based learning as the tip of the spear, and we've been building tools to actually put that in the hands of enterprises themselves. Because we always assumed that there's no way that any company in this space is going to be able to learn all the problems that everybody's facing in any reasonable amount of time. So really, we had to shift the development of content onto those experts, and in this space, that's a challenge, right? Because it can be a very technical craft, and so those skills haven't existed inside the enterprise in large quantity. We've seen a lot of great innovation teams that can tackle XR kind of development, but those innovation teams again are not necessarily the people who really understand the problem. So we built basically three main things. Now we've built a no code authoring environment that puts that power into the business person's hands. We've built a learner experience platform that helps to solve some of the distribution frictions that exist in the enterprise space that make it just really easy to distribute, just like any other content format that they might be looking at using. And then we solved a lot of the enterprise integrations layer. So like kind of the traditional like LMS world when it comes to learning technology. That layer is something that also has to be kept in mind because this doesn't exist on an island, or if it does, it's a problem. It will never scale. And so we wanted to make sure it just flowed into the overall infrastructure in just like any other modality.
Right here. And I know that with the solutions that you do provide, immersive learning is one of the fastest growing verticals in the entire XR industry. And companies such as yours will be able to help facilitate the growth and the upskilling and upscaling, I suppose,
Mhm.
of that type of infrastructure. So what we're going to go ahead and do, we'll jump right into the first question that I'd like to ask you about, which of course is about what are some of the benefits of working with VR training compared to traditional training methods and methodologies? And for you, I guess, how does your company deliver these to others and, look at some of the quantifiable statistics related to that?
Yeah, gosh, it's a great question. So we look at this problem as a very macro problem that we're trying to solve, not just an XR problem. The macro problem is that we are going through so much change as organizations and as individuals in our kind of personal and career development and org development these days that we needed a better tool set to keep up with that pace of change. Then when you look at video, you look at in person classroom learning, you look at the other solutions that are trying to go after this problem, and they all have major pitfalls to kind of keep up. Some are if you're familiar with the learning pyramid, there's a direct correlation right between the modality and the way you're engaged with content with your own retention or measurement of kind of effectiveness of that content. And um, so we like internally like think about it as we have to move people from passive learning, which is like what you would consider kind of video based learning or some like they call it VILT, kind of like the Zoom type learning, to active learning, which VR and simulation is like you're leaned in, right? You are in the simulation, you're making decisions in a way like you would in real life. And passive learn or active learning is really really effective, and so you end up getting an exponential lift on retention, an exponential lift on how fast people can learn, and it's actually because of the engagement method we keep getting people reporting back that it's much more enjoyable. Like people actually from an NPS perspective would much rather that type of engagement than the other things that they've been offered historically. So all of these things like they all add up to a really nice counterbalance to the challenge that we're up against, which is the challenge is the world moves freaking fast. and people need support to keep up with that, and organizations are trying to kind of fight through all these changes all at once. And immersive learning seems to solve a lot of those problems.
Yes, yes, and there's a lot that have been reported on about the benefits of using it, like the jump, the pretty much a meteoric jump in kind of learner retention, engagement rates, things of that nature, quantifiable targets that you can reach. You can set for each of the individual learners and make sure that they get to a certain level to kind of gauge exactly how well they're absorbing a lot of the curriculum. So yeah, I was curious about pretty much like what kind of analytics do you like to track whenever you use these types of programs?
Yeah, it's another good question. I think it goes back to what you were just saying. We have so many different ways to observe, is a learner grasping the concept when you're in this modality, right? Like we have so many different touch points. In the way we do it, most of that's around conversation. So we look at what's said, what choices are made, what's said as a major indicator of grasping those core concepts. But in other kind of immersive simulations, you can actually look at the tasks that are performed and things like that. So there's a ton of data to swim through, and so we've actually seen that as a challenge in the enterprise space. You're going you know from let's call it a data rich environment, but honestly not great data. Like because when you look at video or you look at the types of learning activities or data that flows out of those learning activities, it's very basic in most cases. And so you're going from that where you have tons of data, but it's very basic data to this sea of potentially really, really rich data. And that itself is a big transition for organizations to understand how to use that. So what we did is we said, let's use what we saw a trend, which was that everybody seems to be locking on the idea of a skill as a badge or as something that you can point to instead of like the larger if you were looking at the paradigm today, right? Resumes, university degrees, these are kind of our proof points. Well, now we're saying we need to get more granular than that, and the unit of measurement is actually going to be a skill, which we see in LinkedIn. We see a lot of places where people are kind of following that kind of thinking. But what we did from a analytics perspective is we took all of that complex data that's there in these immersive simulations, and we just made it simple on the back end to look at skills. And so when you log into our dashboard, it's not overwhelming the enterprise with lots of like positional data or interaction data, things like that we can measure and people are measuring very effectively in these simulations. But we make it very simple. It's like, here's the proof point of this skill that you care about. And the reason why is all the choices that were made and all the things that we observed, but we make the actual output very simple to understand. And that's the unit that everybody cares about at the end of the day. If I'm assembling a team or I'm trying to better understand the proficiencies inside my organization, I just want to look at that skill layer because that already is granular enough for me to have a much better insight to just where we sit as an organization. So that seems to be resonating. And a lot of the major learning platforms, governments, I mean, everybody seems to be rallying around this idea of a better visibility around skills from a validated standpoint, not just like, I think one of the challenges with the way that LinkedIn does is it's kind of validated, but everybody, it's like we can all put our own skills up there. And so that validation loop isn't very tight. And so in simulation, that can become a very tight validation loop. You've proven it because of what we saw you do or what you did inside the content. So now I can take that skill as fact, which is really powerful, right? It takes all the bias out of the system. It really makes a lot of things like a super highway for how we think about organizing teams and progression at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen quite a bit of examples from different kinds of companies who do offer these kinds of solutions, and they've noticed just like amazing things that they could track. They know exactly how well the students are engaging in the content, where they actually made issues with content, and how they can improve on that. So, for example, a team of people working on an oil rig, they take one of these immersive learning courses, and they're able to actually know exactly where they made a mistake. And they can go back to that, repeat that over and over again to actually nail it so that when they're ready to deploy to these locations, these remote places where they may not receive the same, the same support. Um, they will always have those skills ready for themselves when they train, on the fly with these types of training modules. So speaking of the training modules, I was actually going to ask you about CoPilot. So
Yeah.
it's one of the major platforms that your company has created. And can you tell us a little bit about what it does, like the no-code tool that it actually offers a lot of content creators?
Yeah, and your point of the oil rig is actually an interesting one because I think a lot of us immediately go to these kind of like high risk, hard to reach places where that's where that training impact can be made. We're kind of doing the same thing, but it's just a bit different, right? Because our high risk scenarios are really focused around conversation, around communication, um, and they do have a heavy cost when you fail in those moments, right? So what we focus, and those are, doctor patient conversations, doctor staff conversations, their sales conversations, their customer service conversations, their leadership conversations, their diversity, equity, inclusion conversations, their performance review conversations. These are, I mean, there's tons of these things that happen in every single business, and they're all high risk, honestly. Because if you get them right, man, it pays huge dividends. But if you get it wrong, I mean, it's a slippery slope. Doesn't matter if it's a customer service issue or something in the leadership, lane. Um, so I still think of it as like it's high risk, safe place to fail. Like that's ultimately what we've accomplished with this space, right? And so what Copilot Designer was built for was to try to take that conversational learning aspect and put it in the hands of the learning designers, the narrative designers, and the business experts. Take it out of the hands of game developers and XR developers. And so that's a no code environment, which allows you to build those conversational models. And what we did is we just optimized all of the complex stuff and put it in the background. So, we generate speech on the fly, but that's a background process. So you can pick a voice, and it makes the actual spoken words. We hook up that speech to an animated character. We do all the animation in the background. And so these are all things that if you are in a typical like Unity or Unreal development process would be, you could build systems that make it faster and faster, but you still require a pretty high degree of development skills. Um, and so now that's all background process, and you can build a lot, based between the building blocks we have in Copilot Designer. The conversation is kind of the key driver, but you also have environmental context, so you can move people around through virtual spaces and have different conversations. Or if you were doing an onboarding of an oil rig, for example, you could still use Copilot Designer for that. We just wouldn't focus the actual interactions on the high fidelity tasks. We would focus it on the kind of high level information flow of how does that environment work. What are maybe some of the danger points and things like that. So those are all user interactions that can be delivered via this kind of no code environment today. I would expect that that's going to continue to like grow over time, where we'll be able to support more and more complex interactions. But out of the gate, every one of those complexities adds an inverse challenge for the business, because it requires them to do things that are not, like, the development skills there get higher and higher and higher the more complex you get. Right. So we as an industry have to make that simple, the way that we've made kind of the conversational learning aspect simple. We will, we'll find paradigms that like become universal, just like happened in mobile and just like has happened in console gaming and other things. And as those things become really universal, then of course, you can roll them back into kind of no code tools where people can use those paradigms. So I think it'll just continue to expand in its number of use cases, but right now it's really focused on those ones that I was kind of outlining.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the no-code tools, another thing that really does for a lot of people is it democratizes the process. So back in the old days, you had to have a team of Unity developers, people who were familiar with Epic Games' Unreal Engine, and it took quite a bit of a painstaking process to get all the metrics, the things that you needed, the elements, the real-time 3D objects, programmed into it. Nowadays, it's just a matter of a snap of a finger, and people can, put those things in a few minutes and get the content ready to go. Just in case they need to do any tweaking or adjustments to the modules they want to offer. And I'm seeing this across the board. from a few companies we're already, discussing things with, that this is the way forward in delivering this kind of generative AI type module and or
Yep.
at least, application program interface. So, I was going to ask you a little bit of something. Looking at these types of, you know, generation tools, what do you think about the democratization, long word, sorry, the
Yeah.
democratization of the entire process and how it can increase the availability to people, hopefully, bringing more people into VR to make these tools, more widespread?
Um, so we've taken a pretty deep look at this from an L&D perspective, right? Which is kind of our lane. Um, and it's really clear kind of how the roles start to shift now with the hands of large language models and kind of generative art tools and things like that that are coming or are already here. Um, so it's a lot like we see with just a lot of roles in business. It's like the traditional role that's been in place for maybe 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 decades is shifting at the hands of technology, and it's becoming this dance between man and machine or people and machine. Um, and that again shifts the skill set a bit. So the paradigm we've been using internally is, if you think of conversational learning, a lot of the times it was a writer's trade. Like if you were a really good narrative designer with a learning background, you could be effective in creating those simulations. With generative AI, it becomes a little bit more of a director's trade. Now you're having this dance with your tools that that you still have to be very intentional about, and you still are going to lean on your narrative background and your learning design background, because you're still going to validate the outputs, right? You're still going to massage the content in a way to fit your use case. So you're still learning on those things, but your actual role is shifting a bit. um, and that's interesting, because in some cases that completely opens it up to a lot larger population of individuals who can create. And in other cases, it kind of can narrow it. I'd say for learning, it's going to widen it out a lot. Um, and and the speed at which you can create content is significantly faster. And therefore, you can now be more nuanced. So, like in the past, if you had time to do one large learning initiative, what they oftentimes do is they try to find like the most common model for all learners that might take that. As we know, like learners are very different. We are very like some of us learn better one way, some of us come, like your baselines are different. Everything's very different. And so to take like a generalized approach to learning in and of itself is problematic. And so, but these tools give us the power to maybe again, because it's so much faster, and like from a content delivery perspective, maybe now we can create 5 modules in the time it would have taken one. And so now we can kind of be a little bit more nuanced or a little bit more intentional about some of the things we're trying to do. So I mean, for us, it feels like that's a 2023 kind of major change initiative that's going to happen across the learning industry. And we kind of always assumed that this was one of the like generative large language models was going to be one of the first places that matured. So it's another reason why we focused on conversational learning, because now that tool set can be leveraged in generating content at scale. So we're really excited about how we pull all these things together now. Um, but we've been thinking about it for a long time.
Yeah, defo. And and as we, as we continue to monitor like what's happening in the industry, we tend to see that there's things like ChatGPT, DALL-E, and a lot of new tools like OpenAI tools that are used to kind of create these generative processes. And that's going to empower companies even more as they create their own proprietary versions of them from the open source code. So it's going to be interesting how we see that develop. We've already seen Microsoft developing it as well. Google's
Yep.
making their own tool, and so it's just going to be a new, a new rush, a new tech rush. Just along with people who were involved in the metaverse, there are also going to be people involved in, the developments of new AI models. So I was going to ask you quickly about that. Speaking of like some of the new kind of collaborations that you have created, you actually worked a little bit with Accenture. There was a series of fundraising that took place, and
Yeah.
I wanted to know a little bit more. Were you involved in their Metaverse Continuum plans, or? Could you go
Yeah,
into more
we
detail
have
about?
been. Yeah, we've been involved in both kind of internal and go to market initiatives. Um, you know, Accenture and a lot of other partners see the same kind of thing with Copilot designers. They find it's a business tool. It's something that they as a partner can build a business around. It's something that they can help empower their customers to build a business case around. So so we get out of the kind of the ether of XR or metaverse into very tangible things very quickly, which has really helped us, right, to in these relationships. So but yeah, we helped on their large internal rollout. All the very large headset purchase that was covered last year. They've been a great partner. We work very closely with PwC and Deloitte and Pearson out of the UK there. Um, OES in Australia. We've got a pretty big partner network now. We've been very kind of ecosystem minded in the way we've been building the company. So this is very much our like kind of our primary business motion is to help other people win, and let us be something that helps to focus on removing those frictions that this new modality has, that we have to kind of like we have to push those into the background. We have to make it simple for everybody. And so Accenture is a great example of that kind of a partnership.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess after they did the 60,000 headsets, they decided they were going to create this Continuum program, and then you see a lot of new ecosystems raising about in the United States with the XR Association, the XR for Europe and European Union. So there's going to be a lot of new possibilities for these types of deepening collaborations to take place wherever you go. So I think that should, especially even for Talespin, that's going to be a very lucrative expansion into the future of, VR learning and other types of sources. So I was going to ask you, were there any other things that you like to add or speak about or discuss regarding Tailspin and where its
I
direction
mean,
plans to go?
I think your last point there is a good one. We what we've been seeing is there's a global conversation going on around these things that is actually quite encouraging. So um, like our partnership with Accenture is not necessarily U.S. centric. It's very global. I mean, where that content went and how it's been distributed has been in dozens of countries. We see a strong pull in Asia Pacific right now, where there's some real thought leadership going on. And one of our lead investors is Seek out of Australia, so they're very very in tune with kind of the labor markets and how that's going. And so we see that conversation going on. We see the Pearson conversation going on, which is London based, right? And they're a global leader in education, and they're being pulled a lot into what's going on in EMEA. See a lot of thought leadership going on in the Middle East. So, but I would say the thing that's really inspiring or encouraging is I feel like generally it does feel like people are having the same kind of pretty responsible conversation around these things, and people are prioritizing a lot of like the ethical and legal considerations of not just XR and a richer data set, but also generative AI and what does that do um, to organizations and just the broader kind of questions around how does this affect everybody. So I think it's been a big concern of ours for a while, knowing how powerful, anything that's this powerful is always got, there's always those risks on the other side. And so I think this last like year and a half has been really encouraging in that matter, because I feel like we're actually now having a pretty, a pretty global and pretty level-headed conversation around it. Um, so I think, and those are things that are going to have to be sorted before we see scaled adoption. People want to understand the risks. They want to understand these kinds of things. So I think between the no-code tools and that type of of very thoughtful considerations that are going on to broader adoption, we're just going to continue to see people step up their engagement. If you rewind the clock 4 years ago, like think of yourself in a corporate position where you're making a critical decision like this. Are you really comfortable to bet the farm on it? There's just a lot of things that could go wrong. And so I think we're getting to a place now where people have that confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. Board members, especially on these companies who are being disrupted by these new technologies, they're going to have, like you said, a lot of questions to seek answers for, because who knows how it's going to affect the operations. Say, for example, there's very little ethics that have been outlined as far as these new emerging technologies. There are no standards. The alliances are shifting every day, so companies such as yours who are involved in the entire ecosystem are going to have, they will go with the flow with these new changes, these new alliances, and these new collaborations, because that will help to build a solid foundation for the future of the industry, so that there are no major issues over how a technology records biometrics, how a company decides to use its technologies, or how people decide to build solutions for those VR headsets that then use the technologies. So there's a lot of questions to ask and answer. But I just wanted to say it's been a fantastic conversation with you. I do appreciate it. Once again, we've been speaking to Mr. Kyle Jackson. He is Chief Executive of Talespin. You can go ahead and check out his website, and we'll include that in the conversation below. If you'd like to follow other conversations like this, please do so at the XR News hashtag at Twitter and LinkedIn. Once again, my name is Cureton, Senior Journalist for XR Today. And it's a pleasure to have you on today again, once again, Kyle, and have a
Thank
wonderful,
you.
fantastic time.
Yeah, have a great week.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care, and until next time. Bye now.